Know that feeling of being stuck? Like you're a hamster on a wheel just going round and round and round and round. You play a ton of Valorant, you try super hard, but somehow you're still in the same spot. Super annoying, right? You want to get better, climb up, but it feels impossible sometimes. Well, I've been right there with you, stuck, frustrated, feeling like nothing I did made a difference. God, dude, it's kind of like life. I watched countless guides, aim tutorials, agent guides, VOD reviews, but nothing really seemed to help at all. It honestly felt like there was just one thing that was missing from these videos. They'd give me tips, but they wouldn't really tell me how to actually apply them in-game. That's when I decided I needed to take things into my own hands. I took all the tips that I learned from these videos, and I compiled them into 3 rules that I would follow every single game to help me rank up. These weren't just tricks that I would only be able to use once a game, like a silly lineup or some sort of trap setup. No, there were rules that could be applied every single round of every single game. These 3 rules changed everything for me. They took me from feeling stuck to climbing up the ranks, all the way to hitting my peak in Immortal 3. And today, I'm going to be sharing my rules with you so you too can break that endless loop and start climbing like I did. They're straightforward, they make sense, and they can really help you get better and climb. So starting out with rule number 1, there's something that you need to understand. Rounds in Valorant are played out in a very interesting way. To most players, it might feel a bit random, but the more you play, the more predictable it becomes. Defense has a standard setup where every player, for the most part, has their place to watch. Throughout the round, though, players on both sides are going to listen and react to what the other team is doing. If we look at defense on Ascent, for example, a standard setup is going to look like this. One on A side as an anchor, a player on Catwalk, another player top mid, one player in Market, and a B side anchor. So let's say, for instance, the attacker pushes up into Market and they kill your teammate. From this point, the defense as a whole just got a whole lot weaker. Players are going to be pulled in that direction to fill in the gaps, stretching their team a little bit thinner. It's a very fluid movement from defense, and it's how defense is generally played even when it's not being thought about. This means when you're playing defense or attackers, you have to keep this type of player rotation in mind. This is what we call the rubber band rule. Don't think of teams as individual players, think of teams as a whole unit, all connected by a rubber band. When one player dies or takes contact, the rest of the team will start to get pulled in that direction. And on attack, this can help you determine where the enemy is actually weak. Your goal is to figure out where the rubber band is being stretched thin and attack that point. The best way to do this is by first creating pressure towards one side of the map and then quickly flipping the script and pushing the other side. So you can pressure A, pull the rotates over there, and then pivot towards a B split through mid, cutting off the defender's rotate and attacking the weak side of the rubber band. This same tactic can be done on pretty much every map. You can pressure A on Lotus and then destroy the door and go into a B split. You can pressure B long on Bind and then hit the teleporter and come back A. It keeps your offense more dynamic. Don't try to just break the rubber band in one go, force it to stretch a little bit and then attack the weak point. So if your next rule up, though, is going to be more about adapting your game plan. Players oftentimes let the game get way too out of hand before they ever start adapting or making changes. So how do you know when you're supposed to adapt, though? Or when you're just getting unlucky? Generally, when I'm playing, it'll take about 4 to 5 round losses before we talk as a team and try and figure out a way to approach a change. That's why we call this one the 4-round rule. If you lose 4 rounds in a row, talk with your team and change something up. Maybe move a sentinel around or craft some sort of push with your teammates. It's really simple, to be honest, but it works wonders, and it'll help you come back from the matches where your team is just popping surrender votes all the time. It's important that when you realize the enemy team has momentum, be it in the first 5 rounds or just at any given point, you try and adjust to shut it down. We've all been there where our team is down 0-5 in our duelists or popping surrender votes. If your team is getting run down over and over on site, it can be a good indicator to help you recognize that you need to either add more players on that site or make an aggressive play to throw off the attacker's rhythm. If you're losing a couple players off the start of the round, you should then recognize that your team needs to play more passive. If you or your teammates are struggling in a certain area, it may be a good indicator that you need to swap positions around to try and get something started. General recognition of patterns in the game are super important, and it's a great rule of thumb to keep track of certain patterns that occur throughout any given round. Pattern recognition can begin after just 2 to 3 rounds as well. You don't need to lose 9 rounds before you realize their Cypher likes to lurk or their Raze likes to push spawn. If you recognize as defense that they like to lurk, maybe make a play designed to pick off that lurker. Or if a player likes to push spawn when rotating over, make sure to have your gun out waiting for it. They'll likely just walk right into your crosshair. Similarly, this also applies to attackers though. If you recognize that the enemy defenders are pushing into your areas and killing you every round, set up and hold it with a few players. Reactively playing around how the opponent is playing is one of the biggest concepts in this game that is far too overlooked. Everyone reacts, and this is why it should be in the top 3 rules for actually pushing your gameplay further. For instance here.
Too long, 3 long.
Yep.
Bring up. We're gonna stay in here.
Echo Brim deadlock. 4.
I'm gonna flash it. I'm gonna flash.
My territory, my rules.
Smoke's down.
Help ready.
1 hit gun. 1 more. Pocket.
B. Last player
Oh, somehow
standing.
backside. Right now.
Spike planted.
You still operating team? Not really,
Raise
no.
bazooka.
Oh, fuck.
Tins and his team were consistently losing B-side in this game while trying to fight for it, making it a very tough retake. His team recognized this and stacked towards A while playing full retake on B, allowing his team to explode onto site for retake. These small decisions that come from analyzing a group of rounds are super important and allow you to look for a solution to round loss streaks.
Enemy remaining.
Awesome long. Cubby, long.
Last
Long
player
cubby.
standing.
Go.
The final rule we have is a simple rule for lurking or flanking. It's important to remember that a flank isn't always required, and just because it worked once, it doesn't mean that you should keep doing it. On defense, the goal of your flank is to get into the opponent's backline and grab a ton of space for your team. Once you're in the backline, it'll heavily complicate the round for them, which is exactly why it's normally going to be difficult to pull off a flank every round. If you're constantly getting in their backline, eventually they're going to dedicate a player specifically to shutting you down. This is actually really good though, because if someone's trying to shut down your flank, that means that if you don't flank that time, you're just wasting that person's time. A general rule of thumb for you is that if you're able to get a flank off successfully 1 or 2 rounds through a match, take a break from flanking, as the enemy team is likely going to be looking out for that flank in the future. The power of flanking comes from winning one huge round and cementing in the enemy's mind that you like to flank. Eventually, after you've wasted that person's time for a few rounds, they're likely going to let their guard down again, and then you can strike again. I see players far too often just run it down on flank every single round, and then they get punished consistently because they did it twice and it worked. You have to keep in mind, flanking can be super dangerous because there's dozens of angles in the attacker spawn that a player can be ratting in. At some point, there's just too many angles to clear and it becomes more of a gamble than anything. Flanks are good for pressure and we're not denying that, and good for winning rounds, but are best when staggered and unexpected. The easier you are to predict, the higher chance you lose on your flank. But obviously, stagger your flanks reactively. If the enemy team never adjusts, then you shouldn't either, honestly. Nats expertly employs great lurking prowess in his games.
Trick shot.
I'm gonna need res.
Cage trigger.
KJ on side.
Cage trigger. One enemy remaining.
You guys res me?
Okay, then dead.
3.
Take what's useful.
Okay, Joe, bye-bye.
In this round, we can see Nats pushing up mid to cut off rotations as his team presses onto A site. He kills Sova, then proceeds to push into Heaven to pinch the enemy team while they retake. At this point, Nats knows that the enemy team is going to be hyper aware of his lurk, so he opts to go with his team for a couple rounds in hopes that they forget about him.
Smoke city again.
Astra City.
Okay, Jet on Cypher.
I can flash
One
for you.
enemy remaining.
Flash in city.
In the smoke spawn, in the smoke
City
spawn.
left.
Fast forward a couple rounds, and we can see him push up into spawn to get a forward position on rotations. He kills Jet, who was completely unaware of him, and makes it a 2v1 for his team. Nats employs a type of lurking where instead of pushing through every round, he staggers it. He will lurk one round, wait 1 to 3 rounds, and perform his lurk again. This will add some pressure in between the rounds he's not lurking, and hopefully after those few rounds, he'll have another opportunity after the enemy team becomes complacent to the way he's playing. This is a very important concept for lurkers to keep in mind. All right, though, guys, before we